My daughter saved my life by questioning a simple white pill. I'm Miller Arison, and what I discovered about those pills nearly destroyed everything I believed about marriage. After my stroke last March, my wife Alicia became my guardian angel, managing every medication, coordinating every appointment, making sure I took my pills exactly when the doctor ordered. Those small white tablets appeared in my palm every morning at 7:30, accompanied by her gentle kiss and reassuring words about my recovery. But when my daughter Grace visited for Sunday dinner and noticed something odd about my medication, she asked one innocent question that unraveled a conspiracy so twisted, so calculated, that my 28 years as a police detective felt like amateur hour. What started as a daughter's concern about her father's slow recovery became an investigation into betrayal I never saw coming. If this sounds like something you'd want to hear more about, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Here's how one question changed everything. The stroke hit me on March 15th, 2024 at 11:43 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was reviewing our insurance policies when the left side of my face went numb. Mercy General Hospital became my world for 6 weeks. The doctor said I was lucky. No major brain damage, some weakness in my left leg, speech mostly intact. The kind of recovery that should have me back on my feet in 3 months. Should have, it don't have. Alicia never left my side during those hospital days. She'd arrive at 6 a.m. with fresh coffee and stay until visiting hours ended. The nurses called her a saint. She learned every medication name, every dosage, every side effect. When Dr. Harrison explained my discharge plan, she took notes in her neat pharmacist handwriting. "Don't worry about anything," she'd tell me, squeezing my hand. "I'll take care of everything." And she did, too well. At home in our $890,000 colonial in Westchester, Alicia transformed into my personal medical coordinator. She moved my clothes to the guest bedroom downstairs, set up a medication station in the kitchen with labeled pill containers, created a recovery schedule posted on our refrigerator. "You need rest," she'd say when I tried to climb the stairs to our bedroom. Doctor's orders. But I'd been a cop for 28 years. I knew when someone was limiting my access to information. The first sign came during my follow-up appointment with Dr. Harrison. I started to answer his question about my energy levels when Alicia interrupted. "He's been very tired," she said, placing her hand on my arm. "Confused sometimes. Yesterday he couldn't remember taking his morning pills." Dr. Harrison nodded, making notes. I stared at my wife. I remembered every pill, every time, every conversation we'd had that week. "That's normal post-stroke," the doctor assured us. "Memory issues are common. It's good he has such attentive care." The second sign came when my old partner Mike Thompson called to check on me. "Miller's resting," Alicia answered before I could reach the phone. "He's not really up for conversations yet. I'll tell him you called." She hung up, turned to me with that caring smile. "You don't want to worry Mike with how you're really doing, do you?" But I wasn't doing badly, not physically. My speech was clear. My memory was sharp. My left leg was getting stronger every day with the physical therapy exercises I did alone in the guest bedroom. So why was I still taking so many pills? I counted them one morning after Alicia left for her shift at Westchester Pharmacy. White oval tablets for blood pressure, blue hexagonal ones for muscle relaxation, yellow capsules for cholesterol. The amber bottles lined up like soldiers with their typed labels and dosage instructions. 15 pills every morning, 15 pills every evening. That seemed like a lot for someone who was supposed to be recovering. But what did I know? Alicia was the pharmacist. She understood these things. She graduated summa cum laude from Albany College of Pharmacy. 22 years of experience, professional credentials hanging in frames throughout our house. I was just a retired cop who investigated fraud and missing persons. What did I know about medicine? That's what I told myself every morning when those pills hit my tongue with their bitter coating. Every evening when fatigue would wash over me like a heavy blanket. Every night when I'd fall asleep in the guest bedroom, wondering why my recovery felt like I was getting weaker instead of stronger. But there was something else I noticed, something that would change everything. The way Alicia watched me swallow each pill, like she was waiting for something specific to happen. The financial papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May. I was sitting in the kitchen, struggling through my breakfast cereal, when Alicia placed a thick manila envelope next to my orange juice. "Insurance update," she said casually, tying her hair back for work. "Just some beneficiary forms that need updating. Standard procedure after a medical event." I opened the envelope. Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance. Policy number 7492851. My hands shook slightly as I read the coverage amount. $15.2 million. I blinked, read it again. The number didn't change. "15 million? I asked. Alicia was already putting on her pharmacist's coat. "It's the policy your union negotiated. Remember? The one that activated when you retired from the NYPD. I didn't remember any $15 million policy. The pension paperwork I'd reviewed showed a standard $200,000 life insurance benefit. Not this. "When did this activate?" "Last year," she said, checking her watch. "When you turn 61, the enhanced coverage kicks in automatically." She kissed my forehead. "Sign where I highlighted, okay? Yellow tabs. I'll file everything when I get home." The door closed behind her. I stared at the paperwork. Beneficiary designation, Alicia Marie Arison, spouse, 100%. Contingent beneficiary, none listed. My daughter Grace wasn't mentioned anywhere. I flipped through the pages, looking for the original policy documents. The application was dated January 15th, 2023, 2 months before my stroke. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing this. I reached for my phone to call the insurance company, then stopped. If I was wrong, if this was legitimate, I'd look like the confused stroke patient everyone seemed to think I was. Instead, I did what any good detective would do. I started documenting everything. The house deed was in the dining room filing cabinet, 437 Maple Ridge Drive, purchased in 2018 for $890,000. Joint ownership, Miller and Alicia Arison. But there was a new document underneath, a quitclaim deed dated March 20th, 5 days after my stroke. It transferred my 50% ownership to Alicia for health and medical considerations. I had no memory of signing this either. My hands were trembling now, not from the stroke, from recognition. In 28 years as a detective, I'd seen this pattern before. Elder financial abuse, the gradual transfer of assets, the isolation from family and friends, the medical emergency that conveniently preceded major financial changes. But victims were usually elderly widows, not retired cops, not people who knew how these scams worked. I opened our joint checking account statements. Regular deposits from my pension, $4,126 monthly. Alicia's pharmacy salary, $6,800 monthly. But there were withdrawals I didn't recognize. Stephen Walsh Consulting, $12,500, monthly payments dating back to February, personal care services, healthcare coordination, medical advocacy, Stephen Walsh. I'd never heard that name before. I logged into our online banking. The password still worked, badge 2847. Alicia hadn't changed it. The checking account showed a balance of $12,400. Normal, but our savings account was nearly empty. $340,000 had been transferred out over the past 4 months. Destination, Walsh Medical Consulting, LLC, business account. Healthcare expenses related to stroke recovery, according to the memo lines, $12,500 every month for care I wasn't receiving, for consultations I wasn't aware of, for medical advocacy I never requested. I printed everything. Bank statements, insurance papers, property deeds. The stack of papers grew thick in my hands. If I stayed silent, if I continued to be the grateful patient who took his pills and didn't ask questions, I would lose everything. The house, the life insurance, the savings account. More importantly, I might lose my life. Because I was starting to remember something from my detective training. Something about gradual poisoning. About spouses who used medical knowledge to slowly incapacitate their victims. about how easy it would be for a pharmacist to modify medications, to replace healing pills with harmful ones, to create symptoms that look like stroke complications while actually causing them. I folded the papers carefully, slipped them into the guest bedroom closet behind my old case files. For the first time since my stroke, I felt like myself again. Not a patient, not a victim, a detective with a case to solve. Grace arrived for Sunday dinner on June 2nd, with her usual armload of design magazines and a bottle of wine. My 26-year-old daughter had inherited my attention to detail, but she used hers to create beautiful spaces instead of solving crimes. "Dad, you look tired," she said, hugging me carefully. "Are you sleeping okay?" "He's been having some rough nights," Alicia answered before I could respond. "The medications make him restless sometimes." We settled around the dining room table, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, one of my favorites, though I could barely taste it anymore. Everything seemed muted since the stroke. Colors less bright, food less flavorful, energy constantly draining away. "How's the recovery going?" Grace asked, cutting her meat into precise pieces. "Slower than we hoped," Alicia said. "Dr. Harrison thinks he might need extended care. We're looking into some excellent facilities." Extended care. This was the first I'd heard of that. "Dad?" Grace looked at me directly. "How do you feel about that?" Before I could answer, Alicia stood. "Time for your evening pills, honey." She returned from the kitchen with my pill organizer, 7 compartments labeled with days of the week. Sunday evening, 5 white pills, 2 blue ones. Grace watched as Alicia placed them in my palm with a glass of water. "Take your time," Alicia said. "Remember to swallow them completely." I put the first pill on my tongue, white oval, smaller than the ones I'd been taking that morning. "Wait," Grace said. She leaned forward, her designer's eye catching something I'd missed. "Dad, didn't you say your blood pressure pills were bigger? Like oval but longer?" Alicia's hand froze on my shoulder. "These are the same ones." "No." Grace pointed at the pill in my palm. "That one's round. The ones I saw last week were definitely oval. Different shapes entirely." I looked down at the pill. Small, round, white. The morning pills had been larger, oval-shaped, with a different manufacturer marking. "Medications come in different generic formulations," Alicia said quickly. "Same active ingredient, different manufacturers." "But you're a pharmacist," Grace said. "Wouldn't you keep him on the same formulation for consistency?" The room went quiet. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The refrigerator is humming in the kitchen. "Are you questioning my professional judgment?" Alicia's voice had an edge I rarely heard. "I'm asking about my father's medication. I've been managing pharmacy operations for 22 years, and I've been his daughter for 26. I set the pill down on my napkin. "Maybe we should call Dr. Harrison tomorrow, just to verify." Alicia's smile looked forced. "Of course, if that would make everyone more comfortable." Grace picked up the pill I'd set down, examined it closely. "This one says Watson on it. Last week's said Teva. Different manufacturers. Generic substitution is standard practice. For blood pressure medication? For any medication. But Dad's condition is serious. Wouldn't you want consistency during recovery?" Alicia stood abruptly. "I think I know how to manage my husband's health care. I think I know when something doesn't look right." I watched my wife and daughter stare at each other across the dinner table. 2 women who both claimed to have my best interests at heart. One with medical credentials and 22 years of experience. One with an artist's eye for detail and no medical training whatsoever. "Show me the bottle," Grace said. "Excuse me?" "The prescription bottle. I want to see the label." Alicia's jaw tightened. "That's private medical information." "He's my father. I'm his wife. And his healthcare proxy." "Which I didn't sign," I said quietly. Both women turned to look at me. "The healthcare proxy forms. In the insurance paperwork. I never signed those." Alicia's face went pale. "You signed them at the hospital. You were tired. Confused. I remember everything I signed at the hospital. Discharge papers, physical therapy authorization, insurance verification. I never signed healthcare proxy documents." Grace stood up. "Dad, where do you keep your medications?" "In the kitchen, at the counter by the coffee maker." She walked toward the kitchen before Alicia could stop her. We heard cabinet doors opening, bottles being moved around. "Grace, those are private—" "Dad!" Grace called from the kitchen. "Come look at this." I stood slowly, my left leg still weak but functional. Alicia followed close behind me, her face tight with something that looked like panic. Grace stood at the counter with 6 prescription bottles lined up in front of her. She'd organized them by medication type. "Look at these labels," she said, pointing. "Same pharmacy, same prescribing doctor, same patient name, but look at the dates." I leaned forward. The labels showed different fill dates for the same medications, some from May, some from June, some I'd never seen before. "This bottle of blood pressure medication was filled May 15th, Grace continued, "but this bottle of the same medication was filled June 1st. Different strengths, different quantities." She held up 2 identical-looking bottles. "Why would Dad need 2 different prescriptions for the same medication?" Alicia reached for the bottles. "Those are samples, for dosage adjustment. Samples don't have prescription labels. They do when they're dispensed through a pharmacy. But you work at Westchester Pharmacy. These labels are from CVS." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. 2 pharmacies, multiple prescriptions, different formulations of the same medications. That wasn't medical care. That was concealment. After Grace left that evening, I sat in the guest bedroom staring at my old case files. Boxes of paperwork from 28 years of detective work. Insurance fraud cases, missing persons investigations, financial crimes against elderly victims. I knew this pattern. I'd seen it dozens of times. The phone rang at 9:15. "Miller?" The voice was familiar, gravelly, tired. "Mike Thompson. How are you holding up, partner?" My old colleague from the NYPD fraud unit. We'd worked together for 12 years before he transferred to Federal Task Force operations. "I'm managing," I said, glancing toward the bedroom door. Alicia was watching television in the living room, but voices carried in our house. "Listen, I tried calling a few weeks back. Your wife said you weren't up for talking." "I wasn't aware you'd called." Mike paused. "That's interesting. She said she'd told you." I lowered my voice. "Mike, I need to ask you something, hypothetically." "Shoot." "If someone wanted to gradually incapacitate a person using prescription medications, how would they do it?" "Jesus, Miller, that's dark even for you. What's going on?" "Just curious, from an investigative standpoint." Mike was quiet for a moment. "Hypothetically? Easiest way would be medication substitution. Replace legitimate prescriptions with similar-looking drugs that cause the symptoms you want to create. Muscle relaxants instead of blood pressure medication. Sedatives instead of vitamins. The victim thinks they're taking medicine to get better, but they're actually getting worse. How would someone get access to those kinds of drugs? Pharmacy access would be ideal. Someone with DEA licensing could order whatever they wanted. Or someone with connections to medical suppliers. What about detection? That's the beauty of it. Symptoms look like progression of the original condition. Patient gets weaker, family increases care, medical professionals assume it's natural decline. By the time anyone suspects something, the victim is too incapacitated to advocate for themselves. I felt my hands shaking. How would you investigate something like that? Blood work first. Independent lab, not through the regular doctor. Look for substances that shouldn't be there. Financial records second. Follow the money trail. Who benefits if the victim becomes incapacitated or dies? Insurance policies, property transfers, ongoing care payments. And evidence collection? Same as any fraud case. Document everything. Record conversations. Photograph medication bottles. Chain of custody for any physical evidence. But Miller, Mike's voice became serious. If this isn't hypothetical, you need professional help. This kind of case requires federal involvement. DEA has a whole unit dedicated to medical abuse. I'm just thinking through some old case files. Bullshit. You're investigating something, and if it's what I think it is, you can't do this alone. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking about Mike's words. 28 years of police work had taught me to trust my instincts. When something felt wrong, it usually was. I opened my laptop and logged into my email account. The password still worked. NYPD badge 2847. In my contacts list, I found the number I needed. Agent Janet Morrison, DEA Healthcare Fraud Division. We'd worked together on a pharmacy theft case in 2019. I started typing an email, then stopped. Digital communications could be monitored. If Alicia was sophisticated enough to orchestrate prescription fraud, she might be tracking my online activity. Instead, I pulled out my old notepad, the same kind I'd used for 28 years of police work. Started making a list of everything I needed to document. 1. Medication inconsistencies, different formulations, strengths, manufacturers. 2. Financial transfers, $340K moved to Walsh Medical Consulting. 3. Insurance policy, 15.2 life insurance activated before stroke 4. Property transfers, quitclaim deed signed during medical incapacity. 5. Healthcare proxy, never signed, but somehow in effect. 6. Communication control, calls intercepted, conversations monitored. Then I made a second list. Resources available. 1. Mike Thompson, NYPD fraud, Federal Task Force connections. 2. Agent Morrison, DEA healthcare fraud. Specialist. 3. Grace, observant daughter, design background, attention to detail. 4. Bank records, online access still active. 5. Prescription bottles, physical evidence, different pharmacies. 6. Medical records, hospital discharge papers, doctor visit summaries. I had everything I needed to build a case. What I didn't have was time, because I was starting to realize something that made my blood run cold. If Alicia was gradually poisoning me, every day I delayed investigation was another day closer to permanent incapacitation or death. I closed the notepad and slipped it under my mattress. Tomorrow I would start collecting evidence, real evidence, the kind that would hold up in court. But tonight, for the first time in months, I wasn't taking my evening pills. It was time to find out what happened when I stopped cooperating with my own destruction. The extended family gathering was Alicia's idea. You need socialization, she said, organizing the June 15th barbecue. Dr. Harrison says isolation isn't good for stroke recovery. By 3 p.m., our backyard was filled with 32 people. My sister Janet and her husband, Alicia's brother and his family, neighbors from our street, colleagues from Westchester Pharmacy, everyone who mattered in our social circle. I sat in a lawn chair under the oak tree, watching Alicia work the crowd. Perfect hostess, devoted wife, medical professional managing her husband's challenging recovery. "How's Miller doing?" I heard Mrs. Patterson from next door ask. "Some good days, some difficult ones," Alicia replied, carrying a pitcher of lemonade. "The medication adjustments are helping, but it's a slow process." Janet approached my chair. "You look tired, little brother." "I'm feeling better than I have in weeks." "Really? Alicia said you've been having memory issues." "Alicia says a lot of things." My sister studied my face. "That doesn't sound like you." "Maybe I'm starting to sound like myself again." At 4:30, Alicia approached with my afternoon pills and a glass of water. "Medication time," she announced loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Doctor's orders." I looked at the pills in her palm. 3 white tablets, 2 blue capsules. Same combination I'd been taking for months. "Actually, I want to skip these today." Alicia's smile faltered. "You can't skip prescribed medication." "Says who?" "Says your doctor." "Says medical science." "Says anyone who understands stroke recovery." People were starting to notice our conversation. The background chatter grew quieter. "What if I want a second opinion?" "Miller, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." Alicia's voice took on that patient, professional tone she used with difficult customers at the pharmacy. Stroke patients often experience cognitive changes, confusion, poor judgment. That's why medication compliance is so important. Maybe my judgment is fine. Maybe someone else's judgment is the problem. The yard was quiet now. 32 people pretending not to watch our medical disagreement play out on the patio. "This isn't the time or place," Alicia said through gritted teeth. "When is the right time, when I'm too weak to ask questions?" Janet stepped closer. "What's going on here?" "My husband is having a difficult day," Alicia explained. Stroke patients sometimes resist their medical care. I'm not resisting medical care. I'm questioning medication that doesn't match what my doctor prescribed. Alicia's face went white. That's not true. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the 2 prescription bottles Grace had found in the kitchen, set them on the patio table where everyone could see. Same medication, same doctor, same patient, different strengths, different manufacturers, different pharmacies. People gathered around the table, Alicia's colleagues from Westchester Pharmacy, neighbors who trusted her professional expertise, family members who'd been hearing about my difficult recovery. Generic substitution is normal, Alicia said quickly, but you told me these were the exact same pills I got at the hospital. They are therapeutically equivalent. Show me the hospital discharge paperwork. It's private medical information. I'm the patient. Show me. Alicia looked around the yard. One of 32 faces watching our marriage dissolve in public, her professional reputation being questioned by her own husband. Miller, you're embarrassing yourself. No, I'm asking questions, something I should have done months ago. Janet picked up one of the prescription bottles. This says lisinopril 10 milligrams, once daily. That's his blood pressure medication. And this one says cyclobenzaprine 15 milligrams, 3 times daily. I felt my stomach drop. What's cyclobenzaprine? Janet read from the bottle. Muscle relaxant for acute musculoskeletal conditions. I don't have a musculoskeletal condition. Alicia reached for the bottles. Those are old prescriptions. This one was filled last Tuesday, Janet said, checking the date. June 11th, 3 days ago. The pharmacy colleagues were reading over Janet's shoulder now. Professional interest in the medication discussion. Cyclobenzaprine isn't normally prescribed for stroke recovery, one of them said. That's for back pain, muscle spasms. Every patient is different, Alicia replied. But cyclobenzaprine can cause confusion, memory problems, fatigue, all the symptoms you've been describing in Miller. Alicia's voice became sharp. I don't appreciate my professional decisions being questioned by people who don't understand the full clinical picture. What clinical picture? I asked. You've never shown me any clinical notes. Because you wouldn't understand them. Try me. I investigated medical fraud for 8 years. I understand more than you think. The word fraud hung in the air like smoke. People exchanged glances. The pharmacy colleagues looked uncomfortable. Miller, you're not well, Alicia said desperately. You're paranoid, suspicious, classic signs of post-stroke psychological changes, or classic signs of someone being gradually poisoned. The yard went completely silent. Even the children stopped playing. That's a very serious accusation, Dr. Patterson said. He was a pediatrician who lived 3 houses down. It's a very serious situation. Alicia laughed, but it sounded forced. My husband thinks I'm poisoning him. Does that sound like rational thinking to anyone? Actually, Grace said, appearing at my side, it sounds like good detective work. She'd been quiet during the confrontation, but now she pulled out her phone. I took pictures of Dad's medication bottles last week. Want to see something interesting? She showed the phone screen to Dr. Patterson. June 1st, Dad was taking lisinopril 10 milligrams for blood pressure. June 11th, same bottle, but now it's filled with cyclobenzaprine 15 milligrams. Same bottle, same label, different medication. Dr. Patterson studied the photos. That's not generic substitution, that's medication replacement. Which is impossible unless someone with pharmacy access switched the contents. Everyone turned to look at Alicia, professional pharmacist, wife with unlimited access to her husband's medications, woman who'd been managing every aspect of his medical care. This is insane, Alicia said. Why would I hurt my own husband? I reached into my other pocket, pulled out the insurance paperwork. 15.2 million reasons. I set the life insurance policy on the patio table next to the prescription bottles. $15 million, payable on my death. Beneficiary, Alicia Marie Arison. Policy activated 6 weeks before my stroke. The pharmacy colleagues were backing away now. This had gone from family disagreement to potential criminal investigation. And here's the quitclaim deed transferring half ownership of our house to my wife, signed while I was incapacitated in the hospital, which I have no memory of signing. Alicia was shaking her head frantically. Miller, please. You're sick. You're confused. No, I'm a retired police detective who finally started doing what I should have done months ago. I stood up slowly, my left leg steady for the first time in weeks. I started investigating. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 p.m. I'd been expecting it, but Alicia hadn't. "I'll get it," she said, moving toward the front door. Most of the barbecue guests had left after our confrontation on the patio. Only family remained, clustering in uncomfortable groups, whispering about medications and insurance policies. Through the front window, I could see 2 unmarked sedans in our driveway. Government plates, federal vehicles. Alicia opened the door to find 3 people in dark suits. 2 men and 1 woman. Professional, serious, the kind of people who didn't make social calls. "Mrs. Arison, I'm Agent Janet Morrison, DEA Healthcare Fraud Unit. This is Agent David Kim and Detective Mike Thompson, NYPD Federal Task Force. We'd like to speak with you and your husband." Alicia's face went pale. "About what?" "May we come in?" We have family visiting." "This won't take long." Agent Morrison stepped into our foyer without waiting for permission. The other 2 followed. Professional courtesy with an underlying authority that made it clear this wasn't a request. I stood up from the living room couch. "Agent Morrison, Mike, thanks for coming." Alicia spun around. "You called them?" "I asked some questions. They decided to investigate." "Miller, what have you done?" Agent Morrison pulled out a folder thick with paperwork. "Mrs. Arison, we have some questions about prescription medications dispensed under your husband's name." "I don't understand." "We have records showing multiple prescriptions for Miller Arison filled at different pharmacies over the past 4 months. Some from legitimate doctors, some that appear to have been falsified." Mike stepped forward. "We also have concerns about financial transactions connected to your husband's medical care." He produced another folder. Bank statements, wire transfer records, business registration documents. Walsh Medical Consulting, LLC, registered business receiving $12,500 monthly for medical services provided to your husband. Can you explain those payments? Alicia looked around the room. Janet and her husband by the window. Grace recording everything on her phone. Federal agents with evidence folders. Her carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. Those are legitimate care expenses. Paid to whom? Agent Morrison asked. Stephen Walsh, medical consultant. And what services does Mr. Walsh provide? Healthcare coordination, medical advocacy. Mr. Walsh isn't licensed in New York State as a healthcare provider, Agent Kim said, consulting his notes. In fact, Mr. Walsh has no medical credentials of any kind. Alicia's voice became smaller. He's a business consultant. Who happens to be your romantic partner? Mike added. The room went silent. Janet gasped audibly. Grace stopped recording and stared at her stepmother. That's not true. Mike opened his folder, pulled out surveillance photographs, clear images of Alicia and a man I didn't recognize, kissing in a restaurant parking lot, holding hands outside a hotel, embracing in front of an apartment building. These photos were taken over the past 6 weeks. Stephen Walsh, age 38, divorced, no fixed employment, currently residing at the Westchester Garden Apartments, Unit 212. Lease signed in your name, Mrs. Arison. Alicia sat down heavily in the armchair. You've been investigating me? We've been investigating healthcare fraud, Agent Morrison corrected. You became a person of interest when we analyzed prescription patterns in the Westchester County area. She produced another set of documents. 15 suspicious prescriptions filled under your husband's name. Medications not consistent with stroke recovery. Some filled at pharmacies where you don't work. Some using doctor authorization codes that appear to have been falsified. I can explain. We also have recordings, Mike interrupted. He pulled out a small digital device. Your husband has been documenting his recovery, including conversations about his medication changes. My voice came through the speaker, tinny but clear. These pills look different from yesterday. Then Alicia's voice. Same medication, different manufacturer? Trust me, honey. I know what's best for your recovery. Agent Morrison added, except the pills weren't the same medication. Laboratory analysis shows cyclobenzaprine instead of lisinopril, lorazepam instead of vitamins, carisoprodol instead of cholesterol medication. Those are muscle relaxants and sedatives, Dr. Patterson said from the doorway. He'd stayed after the barbecue, concerned about the medical implications. Not stroke recovery medications? Agent Kim consulted his notes. Mrs. Arison, can you explain why your husband was receiving muscle relaxants and sedatives instead of the blood pressure and cholesterol medications prescribed by his doctor? Alicia looked around the room desperately. Medication errors happen. 15 times? Generic substitutions can be confusing. These weren't generic substitutions. These were completely different drug classifications. Agent Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Arison, we also have evidence of your relationship with Stephen Walsh, dating back 14 months, before your husband's stroke, before the insurance policy activation, before the property transfers. She produced another photograph. Alicia and Stephen at a restaurant, clearly intimate, with a date stamp from February 2023. This relationship predates your husband's medical emergency by over a year, which suggests premeditation. Mike opened his final folder. We also have communication records, text messages between you and Mr. Walsh discussing your husband's condition. He read from a printout. March 22nd. Alicia to Stephen. Phase 1 complete. Insurance confirmed. Property transfer processing. Stephen to Alicia. How long until Phase 2? Alicia to Stephen. Depends on how well he responds to treatment. And March 30th. Stephen to Alicia. Lyra says we need to speed up the timeline. Alicia to Stephen. Can't rush this. Has to look natural. I felt cold spreading through my chest. Who's Lyra? Agent Morrison answered. Stephen Walsh's 22-year-old daughter, from his previous marriage, currently enrolled at Westchester Community College, studying pharmacy technology. The pieces clicked into place. The conspiracy wasn't just Alicia and Stephen. It included his daughter. Someone young enough, desperate enough to help orchestrate the gradual murder of a stranger for money. How long has this been planned? I asked. Mike consulted the evidence folders. Based on communications we've recovered, initial planning began 18 months ago, around the time you first mentioned updating your will and insurance policies. The insurance policy I never applied for was submitted with forged documents and a falsified signature. The insurance company is cooperating with our investigation. Agent Morrison stood up. Mrs. Arison, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. As she began reading the Miranda rights, Alicia looked directly at me. Miller, please. You don't understand. I do love you. I stared at my wife of 8 years, the woman who'd nursed me through food poisoning and helped me through my father's funeral, who'd celebrated my retirement and planned our future together, the woman who'd been slowly killing me for months. No, I said quietly. You love $15 million. Agent Kim was already on his radio. This is Kim. Execute the warrants. Stephen Walsh, Westchester Garden Apartments, Unit 212. Lyra Walsh, student housing at Westchester Community College. Alicia stood up slowly as Agent Morrison finished the Miranda warning. I need to call my attorney. You can call from the station. As they led her toward the door in handcuffs, she turned back to me one last time. The pills would have been easier, she said, less painful than this. And for the first time since my stroke, I felt like the detective I'd always been, not the victim I'd almost become. The raids happened simultaneously at 7:30 p.m. While Agent Morrison was driving Alicia to the federal building in White Plains, Agent Kim and Detective Thompson executed search warrants at Stephen Walsh's apartment and Lyra Walsh's dormitory room. I stayed home with Janet and Grace, watching the investigation unfold from our living room. Federal agents photographed every prescription bottle in our house, collected samples of each medication for laboratory analysis, documented the pill organizers and medication schedule Alicia had created. My phone rang at 8:15. Miller, it's Mike. We got them both. What did you find? Stephen Walsh tried to flush documents down the toilet. Didn't work. We recovered financial planning spreadsheets showing projected timeline for your death, insurance payout distribution, property liquidation estimates. I felt sick. They planned my funeral before I died? They planned their future after you died. Stephen and Alicia were going to split the insurance money, buy a house in Florida, start a medical consulting business. What about the daughter? Lyra's cooperation bought her a plea deal. She's been documenting everything for months. Text messages, financial records, even recorded conversations. She was recording her own father? Apparently she got cold feet when she realized they were actually killing someone. Started keeping evidence as insurance. Agent Morrison's voice came through the speakerphone. Mr. Arison, we're at the pharmacy now. Westchester Pharmacy cooperated fully with our search warrant. What are you finding? Alicia had access to controlled substances through her DEA license. We found evidence she'd been ordering muscle relaxants and sedatives using forged prescription orders, small quantities over several months. How did she avoid detection? The orders were spread across multiple wholesalers, different suppliers for different medications. No single vendor saw a suspicious pattern. But the quantities were significant when combined, Mike added. Enough cyclobenzaprine to keep you sedated for months. Enough lorazepam to cause serious cognitive impairment. Dr. Patterson spoke up from across the room. Mr. Arison, we should get you to the hospital. If you've been taking those medications for months, we need blood work to check for organ damage. What kind of damage? Long-term muscle relaxant abuse can affect kidney function, liver metabolism, cardiovascular performance. Agent Morrison continued her report. We also found documentation at the pharmacy. Alicia kept detailed notes about your medication response, dosage adjustments, timing modifications. This wasn't random poisoning. This was systematic pharmaceutical manipulation. My hands were shaking. She was experimenting on me. She was calibrating the dosage, trying to find the optimal level of incapacitation without triggering immediate medical intervention. Mike's voice became harder. Miller, she was planning to increase the dosages gradually until your system shut down completely. The timeline suggests she expected you to die within 6 to 8 weeks. Janet grabbed my hand. Oh my God. But the investigation interrupted that timeline, Agent Morrison said. When you stopped taking the pills 3 days ago, your body started metabolizing the accumulated toxins. That's why you've been feeling stronger. What happens now? Stephen Walsh is being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and healthcare fraud. Maximum sentence is 25 years federal prison. Alicia faces the same charges plus additional counts for pharmaceutical theft and DEA license violations. She's looking at 30 years minimum. Lyra Walsh gets probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation. Her testimony will be crucial for prosecution. Grace looked up from her phone. Dad, there's something else you should know. She showed me her screen. A news article from the Westchester Journal News. Local pharmacist arrested in husband's poisoning case. Federal agents investigate an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. It's already public, Agent Morrison answered. Healthcare fraud investigations are public record once arrests are made. The media picked it up immediately. Mike added, this is going to be a significant case. Pharmaceutical professionals poisoning family members is extremely rare. The DEA wants to use this as an example of industry oversight. What about my recovery? Dr. Patterson answered. Complete medical evaluation tomorrow. Blood work to check organ function. Medication review to establish proper prescriptions. Physical therapy assessment to determine actual stroke recovery progress. The good news is that your symptoms were artificially induced, Agent Morrison said. As the muscle relaxants and sedatives clear your system, you should see significant improvement in energy, cognitive function, and physical strength. How long will that take? Based on the dosages we found, probably 2 to 3 weeks for complete clearance. You might feel substantially better within days. I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything. 8 months of gradual decline. Physical weakness I'd attributed to stroke damage. Cognitive confusion I'd blamed on brain trauma. Fatigue and depression that seemed like normal recovery challenges. All of it artificially created by someone I trusted completely. Miller? Mike's voice brought me back to the present. There's one more thing. What? The insurance company is voiding the $15 million policy. Fraud invalidates all coverage, but they're also investigating other policies Alicia might have modified. Other policies? Your pension benefits, your original NYPD life insurance. She had power of attorney authorization that allowed her to make changes. Agent Morrison added, "We're working with your pension administrator to restore any unauthorized modifications. Full financial review should be complete within 30 days. So I get my life back? You get your life back, and justice gets served." After the agents left, I sat in the quiet house with Janet and Grace. The medication bottles were gone, collected as evidence. The pill organizers were empty. For the first time in months, I wouldn't be taking evening medication. For the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The trial began 6 months later, in December 2024. By then, my recovery was complete. Blood work showed no permanent organ damage. Physical therapy had restored full strength to my left leg. Cognitive testing revealed no stroke-related impairment whatsoever. Dr. Harrison called it miraculous. I called it criminal justice. Stephen Walsh pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, healthcare fraud, wire fraud for the electronic financial transfers. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. This was not a crime of passion, Judge Margaret Sullivan said during sentencing. This was a calculated, premeditated attempt to murder another human being for financial gain. Mr. Walsh showed no remorse and no recognition of the gravity of his actions. Stephen's daughter Lyra received 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service. Her cooperation with investigators had been complete, providing recordings and documentation that secured the convictions. Ms. Walsh made serious errors in judgment, the judge continued, but her decision to document the conspiracy and ultimately cooperate with law enforcement prevented a murder from being completed. Alicia's trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: pharmacy records showing unauthorized medication orders, financial documents proving the insurance fraud, recorded conversations discussing timeline and methodology, medical testimony about the effects of long-term muscle relaxant and sedative administration. The defense argued diminished capacity, claimed Alicia was manipulated by Stephen Walsh, suggested she was trying to help my recovery, not harm it. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes, guilty on all counts. Judge Sullivan sentenced Alicia to 28 years in federal prison, loss of pharmacy license, restitution for medical expenses and financial damages, prohibition from working in any healthcare-related field. Mrs. Harrison violated the most fundamental trust in human relationships, the judge said. As a spouse, she owed her husband loyalty and care. As a medical professional, she owed him competent and ethical treatment. Instead, she used her professional knowledge and personal access to slowly torture and attempt to murder the person who trusted her most. The Westchester Journal-News covered the sentencing extensively. Local pharmacist gets 28 years for husband's poisoning, ran on the front page with a photo of Alicia in handcuffs. The story went national. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC all featured segments about the case. When healthcare becomes deadly. The Miller-Harrison case aired on Dateline NBC 3 months later. I declined most interview requests, but I did speak at a conference for the National Association of Elder Abuse Prevention. Trust is essential in relationships, I told the audience of social workers and law enforcement officers, but verification is essential for survival. When someone controls your medical care, your finances, and your communication with the outside world, you're not in a relationship. You're in captivity. The financial recovery took longer than the physical recovery. The insurance company voided the fraudulent $15 million policy, but paid $150,000 in legal fees and damages. Connecticut Mutual implemented new verification procedures for large policy applications. Stephen Walsh's medical consulting company was liquidated. I recovered $230,000 of the money Alicia had transferred to them. The quitclaim deed was reversed through court order. My full ownership of the house was restored. Most importantly, my pension benefits were untouched. Alicia had never gained access to those accounts. Grace moved back home for 3 months while I readjusted to independence. Her design business had taken off during the trial publicity. Clients wanted the interior designer whose attention to detail had solved a murder conspiracy. "I keep thinking about that Sunday dinner," she told me one evening. "What if I hadn't noticed the pills were different?" "You saved my life." "You would have figured it out eventually. You're a detective." "I was a victim." "You made me remember I was also a detective." But Mike Thompson retired from the federal task force after the case closed. 28 years of investigating fraud, he said at his retirement party. "This one was personal. Glad we got the bastards." Agent Morrison was promoted to supervisory special agent. The DEA created new oversight procedures for pharmacy license holders with access to controlled substances. 6 months after the trial ended, I met Janet Patterson for coffee. She was a widow from my neighborhood who'd lost her husband to actual medical complications, not induced ones. "How do you trust again?" she asked. "After something like that?" "You don't trust blindly," I said. "You trust with your eyes open. You verify. You ask questions. You stay alert." Is that enough? It has to be. The alternative is never trusting anyone, and that's not living either. We started dating in the spring, slowly, carefully, with complete transparency about finances, medical information, and future plans. Trust but verify. The motto that had saved my life. Today, 18 months after my stroke, I'm healthier than I was before the medical emergency. My blood pressure is normal. My cholesterol levels are excellent. My left leg is completely functional. Dr. Harrison calls my recovery extraordinary. I call it survival. The guest bedroom is now my office. I'm working as a private investigator, specializing in elder financial abuse and medical fraud cases. Clients come from across the northeastern United States, referred by attorneys, social workers, and law enforcement agencies. Every case reminds me how vulnerable we become when we surrender our autonomy to someone else. How trust without verification becomes victimization. Grace visits every Sunday for dinner. We check each other's medications now, comparing labels to pharmacy printouts. She calls it a trauma response. I call it intelligent caution. The house feels different without Alicia's presence. Quieter, safer. The kitchen counter where she organized my pills now holds case files for my investigation business. Sometimes I wonder if I would have detected the poisoning without Grace's intervention. Sometimes I think my detective instincts would have surfaced eventually. But I'm grateful I didn't have to find out. Trust is earned daily, even in marriage, especially in marriage. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. Have you ever had to investigate someone you trusted? Share your experience in the comments below. Subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, verification isn't betrayal, it's survival.